Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon. Welcome to the Cabinet meeting, the meeting of the Housing and Preventing Homelessness Portfolio Decision meeting. So this is being done via Microsoft Teams in line with the relevant coronavirus regulations involving local government, which allows such meetings to be conducted virtually. That means it will be slightly different in that we're more reliant on the computers actually working and the system actually working than being in person. It also means that I do not need to run through the fire drill. I do not know who's hosting the meeting, but I hope that the facility to mute everybody in case they start talking for too long is never exercised. I would, though, say that if you're not speaking, could you please mute yourselves, and that will include me. That, I think, is it, Democratic Services. That's what I'm supposed to say, I understand. But aside from that, I will go along with the with how this normally works. So thank you very much indeed. Anna, do I have any apologies for absence? Anna is our Democratic Services person who will know about these things. Is she there? Please come in. No. Right. Peter, have you heard of any? Have you had any apologies, or does anybody know of any? Because I ain't had any. Is this working? Hello.
Councillor Sanders,
Yes.
I think Anna might have dropped off
Okay.
the meeting.
Okie doke. Yes, she said. Does anybody have anything interesting to declare? This would cover me and Cal, and I'll introduce everybody after this particular item. Cal, do you have any declarations of interest at all?
No.
No. Good. Neither have I. Okay, so for the massed hordes who are watching this, I will ask everybody to introduce themselves formally and then explain a bit about how the meeting will progress. I'll start with my top left, which is Peter. Please introduce yourself, Peter. And if you can't introduce yourself, I will move to James.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. So James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Thank you very much. Cal.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward and Labour spokesperson for housing.
Thank you, Cal. Wayne.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Lovely, thank you, Wayne. Steve.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Thank you very much. Meredith.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director of Buildings, Portsmouth City Council.
Thank you. And finally, Joe.
Joe Bennett, Head of Business Relationships, Growth and Support.
Thank you very much. I'm Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat Cabinet Member for Housing. So the way this meeting will try and work is that we have two reports which I've requested, and before I begin, I'll explain a bit more as to why I've requested them. Then individual officers will introduce the reports. As we don't have Democratic Services on, we don't know whether there have been any deputations made by the public, but if there are, we will look at those. And then Cal, firstly, and then me, will answer various questions related to each of the reports in turn, and then I will do the summing up. Because of the way the cabinet system works, I would normally take any decisions that are related, but as both reports are for noting as opposed for decision making, which I'll explain a bit more about in a bit, that will mean that if there are any particular points, we'll have to take them away and explore them as opposed to deciding them, and that may happen. Okay, so I shall start with what is called the Building Safety Regulatory Reform Report, which essentially is a jargon-filled way of actually saying, just actually giving people an idea as to what upcoming laws there are to try and keep people in council blocks safe, particularly relevant in the light of the horror that occurred at Grenfell Tower. And I've asked for those reports because I wanted, in the interest of openness, really, to help explain the latest laws that are coming around making buildings safe, and also the impact that will have both on the council and also on, more importantly, our council tenants, because safety is absolutely critical and paramount as a landlord. Now, the report is in your name, James, but I don't know whether you would want to delegate that task to Steve or Meredith or anyone else.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Sanders. So I think between Steve and Meredith, they're going to introduce the report.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so this report is on the building safety regulatory reform. Purpose of the report is to update Cabinet regarding the reform bill that is being consulted on, and also to update Cabinet in regard to what Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings response to that draft bill is as it goes through the various stages. The briefing report is in 3 stages. So the first is an overview of the building safety bill. Second section is a brief summary of the fire safety bill. And then the third section is really just to talk through what our response and the next steps are for HMB. So as you correctly pointed out, the bill is really the government's response, legislative response to the Grenfell Tower fire and Dame Judith Hackett's 2018 review. The bill essentially introduces a new regulatory regime for high-risk residential buildings, and what it's particularly focusing on are buildings that are over 18 metres high or above 6 stories high. Currently, there's no indication of when this will become legislation. But obviously it's in those early stages, so it's right really for us to update Cabinet about where we are at the moment and what the themes are. So as indicated, the main thrust, or one of the main thrusts, is really to set up a new national building safety regulator that will sit within the Health and Safety Executive. And they will be responsible for implementing the new regulatory regime for high-risk buildings, overseeing fire safety, or overseeing safety and performance of all buildings. And I think that's not just about the heights of buildings, but that's about any tenure. So this isn't just about social housing, this is about private buildings as well. And also assisting and encouraging competence, and obviously that was one of the themes that came out of Dame Judith Hackett's review, was making it very clear about competency for those involved in the various stages of building management and building construction. They will establish and consult 3 advisory committees. One is a building advisory committee that will look at guidance on the built environment and provide sort of expert advice. Second committee is about industry competency, making sure that there's a consistent approach to enforcing competence. And then the third committee is around a residents panel, and making sure that residents are able to contribute to key changes in the legislation. Another key factor of the bill is the gateway regime that it introduces. Essentially, there'll be 3 gateways. One will be at the planning permission stage. Second gateway will be prior to construction work actually beginning. And then the third gateway is at completion of the building works, and when essentially it's handed over to being a building in occupation. And obviously, all of that applies to us in various forms, but obviously one area of particular focus is where the obligations in relation to buildings when they're in occupation. So the key areas around the bill are around having an accountable person. This is a legally responsible person for the safety of higher risk buildings. And what there will be a requirement for is to register those higher risk buildings before occupation. And when, as part of that registration process, there will be the requirement to present a building safety case for each of those registered buildings that really details what those risks are and how those risks will be managed in terms of the ongoing life of that building. Residents will be at the centre of the new regime and the draft bill, and even as far as the building safety case, there will be a requirement to produce a residents engagement strategy. And the resident engagement strategy will talk about how information will be provided to residents in those blocks, the scope of what residents will be consulted on, and how effective the resident strategy will actually be and how will it be assessed and measured. There will also be a complaints procedure and details about how the complaints process will actually be managed in relation to safety concerns. And the other aspect from the resident point of view is that what the bill is proposing is that the accountable persons will have stronger rights to enter residents' dwellings and issue enforcement notices to make sure that the fire safety measures within those individual properties are being maintained sufficiently to protect all the residents in the block. Next bill is the Fire Safety Bill. This is about amending the existing Fire Safety Order 2005. And the key aspects of that is really to extend the scope of the Fire Safety Bill to include external walls and hence any cladding on those external walls. And also clarifies the role with regard to entrance doors that lead onto communal areas, which is obviously two key aspects of fire safety, certainly in high risk buildings, but in all buildings really. And there is also within the bill, there will be discussion around how regular those fire door inspections will take place, and there will be certainly the discussions that we've been party to. There's a sliding scale being proposed in terms of how regular those inspections will take place, depending on the risk of the particular buildings. So in terms of H&B Directorate's sort of response and next steps really, just really to make Cabinet aware, James, as the Director, already chairs a Senior Manager's strategic quarterly meeting where we have discussions about about compliance, building compliance, and various safety groups that we've already set up. And one of the discussions that we're already commencing with is discussing with the resident consortium how we can potentially expand that quarterly meeting to include residents, so that we can make it really visible from a compliance point of view what we're doing, and to rename that a building and customer safety panel that meets quarterly to talk about all things safety with regard to our buildings. And what we also already do is that we do report our compliance to Governance, Audit and Standards Committee quarterly. And what we would look to do is to enhance the scope of that report that we currently do to include new indicators as the legislation goes through different stages and different themes emerge from that building safety bill. We've already set up various building safety groups internally within the Directorate. So we have a building safety high-rise group that is the building service and the private sector housing service. And we meet quarterly to discuss and share information around our high-rise buildings within the city. And we've also included in those meetings Hampshire Fire, so that we're sharing information about what we're doing in the different areas. So, and that means it includes private sector blocks as well as social housing blocks. We also have a building safety fire group that was established 3 years ago, and that's where senior managers within the directorate meet regularly to discuss policy and fire incidents and what we can learn and how we can communicate certain messages regarding fire safety to our residents. And then we also meet with Hampshire Fire fairly regularly throughout the year with the commander and various members of the management side of Hampshire Fire to discuss sort of various joint community initiatives and training exercises. And in fact, I think today there was another training exercise at Leamington House that we facilitated. And that's been very well received by Hampshire Fire, and really is about us trying to make sure that we keep that profile of fire safety going, but also work closely with Hampshire Fire and coordinate how we can engage with the community regarding fire safety. In terms of the next steps for us, we're already starting to look at pulling together what information we've already got on our high-rise buildings in anticipation of the legislation, so that we can be prepared and ahead of the curve, really. And you know, to give a bit of context, we've got 39 high-rise buildings that are social housing blocks within the city, and I think as you can see in the report, Charles Dickens has the lion's share, but we've also got a number of blocks in Nelson and St Thomas's Ward and one in Cosham. And then we've also, working with private sector housing team, they've got 63 blocks that are high-rise blocks, that all of which could be potentially ones that fall within the remit of the legislation and will require registration. And in terms of other next steps, obviously there's a big focus, and certainly when we come to Cabinet in March to talk about the plan programme, there will certainly be continuing focus on various aspects of fire safety. There will be programmes talked about in terms of sprinkler installations, door replacement programmes, and certainly a big focus in those sort of key areas to make sure that we are keeping our buildings safe. And the other next step, as the bill goes through the various stages of parliamentary stages, we will obviously keep reviewing our own structure and make sure that our structure is aligned to the different roles that it talks about within the legislation. And finally, the report really focuses on the HMB aspect, but obviously there are other directorates that will be impacted by the building safety legislation, and we will obviously liaise with our colleagues in other directorates to let them know what we're doing and share any information across the different directorates. That's it, really. Any questions, Councillor?
Before any questions, does any officer have anything else to add? That was a very welcome and comprehensive approach there from Steve. Anything anybody has? Any officers wish to add anything? No. Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that. Cal, fire away.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Steve, for the report. I think everyone probably accepts now the importance of building safety after what happens in Grenfell and what the kind of subsequent investigations have told us about how deregulation and privatisation ultimately led to a situation where people's lives were put at risk. And we still know there's plenty of buildings where issues persist, including within the city. I know in my ward there's a block at the moment where a housing association who owns it are currently in the process of taking off cladding, which was found to be unsafe. Another resident contacted me a few weeks ago to say they've had something similar happened in their block, and all of a sudden they're having to have 24-hour fire watches put on to keep them safe in their homes. So clearly people are going to be really anxious and concerned about what the future holds for them. I think the legislation that's being brought forward hopefully will be a step in the right direction. It's clearly a very comprehensive approach towards building safety. I also think that one of the things it's worth reflecting on and is actually perhaps the potential tension or conflict between resident privacy and resident safety. One of the parts of this legislation is potentially going to be an increased responsibility for landlords to inspect people's homes or do works to people's homes that requires them to gain access to those properties, potentially on a regular basis. Now, clearly, there's a strong safety case for that to happen, but I do think that we need to keep in the back of our minds that actually these are people's homes, and that people's privacy and their right to a kind of quiet space to call their own is maintained in as much as possible. And I think linked to that is really the importance of communications and community engagement as this goes forward. I know the council has already in the process of talking to its residents about this, but I think that it's really important that we bring people with us and explain why changes are coming forward and really why they're so important. Obviously to keep people happy, but also in order to try and ensure that people adhere to what's being put in place. Another part that the kind of current legislation and government changes around housing policy is about promoting the role of the tenant voice, the resident voice. Something that came out of Grenfell was clearly that residents had raised concerns, but that they were ignored or they were marginalised or people didn't listen to them because they lived in social housing. And we need to ensure that is never the case again. I think there's work to be done around that in Portsmouth, around building the infrastructure that is really required for tenant voice and residents to have their say. I think things like residents associations are something that we need to try and encourage and nurture. Maybe they're things of the past to some extent. I don't know. I'm personally keen on resident associations. I think where they are in place, they work well. However, I know in the city council stock, there's been a kind of decline over a long period of time over the number of residents associations that are active and in place. I know as ward councillors, it's something we're keen to kind of encourage people to set up if they haven't got already, or to engage in ones that are already there. But perhaps going forwards with kind of virtual meetings and all the rest of it, we can look at changing the way in which residents are able to engage in the management and the control of their homes. So I think overall kind of very much welcome the report. I think we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. But I think really my main message, and I know this is something that officers and yourself, Darren, will no doubt be sympathetic to, is just the importance of that community engagement throughout the process and ensuring that we bring people with us when we're making these significant decisions about changes to the way in which their homes are managed.
Thank you, Cal. That to be honest, that sounded like a good Liberal statement there. So I don't think there's anything I could disagree with in that. So thank you very much, Cal. And it is something that I've certainly been talking to officers about. Residents associations vary. I mean, the one in my old mum's block of Horatia House was there for ages, but people just stopped turning up to it. And that was difficult, and trying to encourage people is always difficult. Whereas the one, say for instance, in the block that's known as the Australias around the back of Tesco's in Lamport, does a fantastic job. In Buckland, they do a fantastic job. So it is variable, but I think it's one of the things certainly I've been asking officers about. I take it there weren't any questions as far as that was concerned, Cal, which is always fine. But please feel free to ask them if that's all right. But I'll take that as your thoughts. I did have a few questions, and I don't know whether it's actually in the legislation or not. But the first one is around the residents panel. How much flexibility do we have in terms of setting up the scope of community engagement and resident engagement? The report seems quite vague, so I assume the bill is quite vague because nobody knows yet. Is that a reasonable estimate, colleagues?
I don't think it's very. You're right. It's not very clearly defined. Obviously, there is the advisory resident panel that the HSE will be overseeing, and I think the aim of that will be that will sort of set out some best practice. And certainly, there's been some early adopters of the draft bill, and obviously what we'll be doing is linking in with those as more information comes out, so that we can sort of make sure that we can get ahead of the game. But I think what is key is that we are engaging and looking at various ways of engagement with all the residents in the blocks, and sort of recognising what their concerns are, and bring them on board with it, so that it's not that we're not trying to force something on them. We're trying to work with those residents in each individual blocks, whatever those concerns are.
Yeah, and I think that the point about the accountable person, basically, whoever the accountable person is, or I presume their representatives, being able to go into somebody's house or a flat is potentially quite difficult. And I also have issues around privacy. But again, in Leamington and Horatia houses, we found that the gas canisters that every resident was told not to bring in were brought in. And those were the very gas canisters that could well have caused the type of explosion that forced us to remove people from the block. It's in the interests of safety. So I think that could be quite an interesting one. Also in 3.15 of the report, you talk about residents having to keep their properties in good repair. Has that the level of repair, has that been spelt out in the legislation, or is it something else we're waiting for someone to turn up and tell us?
I think that is about a sort of general statement, really, probably around the fact that obviously as landlords we have a responsibility, but there's also making sure that really residents are aware of what those fire safety features are. And obviously let us know when those things break. And a good example is, everybody should be encouraged to sort of test their smoke detector. And it's about then reporting that through when that's broken. So I think that's what it means about that. It is really about, again, I think it comes back to, like Cal's point really as well, about it's about educating and making sure people are aware of what those features are in there for. And then they have a responsibility as well, because we're not in there every minute. But obviously they should know what those important factors are that they should be reporting for us to then help them maintain.
Yeah, I think that's actually fair. I mean, in some blocks there will be people who will be on site, or people they can access, whether it's blocks that, like Ladywood House, for instance, which specialises in old age pensioners. So there's that level of communication already. But I think it'll be interesting to see how that can be expanded to everyone else. But I fear that there will be a bit of fear initially, when actually I don't think there's so much in the way of fear that needs to be done. Okay, those are my questions. My final comments on this is that I think one of the issues, that one of the many horrors that emerged from Grenfell, was that the residents told the residents told the council there was a problem. Residents told the council the cladding wouldn't work. Residents were ignored. And proper communication and respect may have stopped that horror show. So although this is a bit of after the horse has bolted to some extent, I think it's welcome that residents are being put at the centre of legislation, because it's long overdue, to be perfectly honest. This is no doubt going to be an evolving feast, because we don't know what else is going to emerge from the Grenfell inquiry. We don't know if it's going to be extended to low-rise blocks, for instance, where there's even less resident engagement than there is in high-rise blocks, for instance. And we don't know if that's coming. It might do. But I think to plan now is very, very sensible. I know that the sprinkler programme is something that the Liberal Democrat administration has been very keen to introduce. It's gone through at least 2 budgets, which I've seen, and I look forward to seeing it again in March. And I realise it's been delayed in large part due to the virus and the consequences of the virus. But that is absolutely crucial in terms of giving people confidence that things like Grenfell won't happen again. The first duty of a landlord is to keep residents safe, and that's got to be our priority. And I hope all landlords think the same way as we do. So with that, I think Anna, I meant to note this report, and I don't think there are any subsequent actions, but I think it might be useful when we've got more information for it to come back here, so that we can get an update at some stage. But that's not going to be every month, but just maybe once or twice a year. Is that all right, colleagues?
Yeah, I'll note it as it's to be noted.
That, and I would like that noted and put in the minutes, please. Thank you very much. That's excellent. Meredith and Steve, if you wish to stay on for the next item, please feel free to. You don't have to, but feel free to. But that's very kind of you. And so we move to the second report. I'm told that there are no deputations at this meeting, which may speed things up a tad. But the next report, which is with regards to what is described as the disposal and replacement of council housing. So I'll just explain why I've asked this to come here. And it follows a conversation which Councillor Peter Harris, who isn't here, who's the Conservative spokesman on housing, raised at a previous meeting here, and Councillor Corkery raised with me at a full council meeting. And that's essentially around issues around acquisitions and disposals or buying and selling council houses. This report has come here after a discussion with the city solicitor, because essentially these things fall within what's called officer delegations. So they're not meant to be political things. The individual buying and selling of properties is something that is rightly not shouted about totally, because nobody buys a house and tells everybody what the price is. So what I've wanted to do was to actually get into the principles behind which we buy and sell homes, because I think they are valid forms of public discussion, and also talk through where we go from here. That's why I've put it here, because we need to balance commercial sensitivity with the need to be open with everybody. Again, James, this report is in your name, but I suspect someone else might want to talk to it.
On this occasion, Councillor Sanders, I'll introduce the report, and then the officers that remain may be helpful in answering questions. So the report before you is unchanged, but its purpose is to firstly outline how the delegations that fall to my post as Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services are exercised with regard to the disposal of council housing. And we've included in the report some detail on the principles that are used and a bit about the process. And I've included the recent disposal of the council housing through the auction as a case study, just to show and demonstrate how those principles were applied in that instance. And then you also requested some detail on the process of acquiring council housing through the replacement home schemes. Forgive us that there's a variety of terms used in the report, but broadly this is the scheme to replace council housing through purchasing property on the open market. And the report goes into some detail about how that process so how we follow that process. And again, my delegation is exercised. And then we've also included a bit of detail in there about the funding model that's used as well. Suffice to say, on the second part, in terms of acquiring properties, the replacement home scheme, that's quite dynamic. We are very active in the market. So the statistics which are referenced in the report are correct at the time this report was written, so 3 or 4 weeks ago. And those figures are likely to have changed, but it shows you the pipeline of properties that we have either purchased fully through to completion or are actively in the process of purchasing year to date. I don't have anything else to add, Councillor Sanders, but happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you for that, James. Cal, questions or comments or both?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I have any questions at this stage. This is obviously something that has been that I've discussed in quite a lot of detail with officers. I think I've probably fleshed out a lot of those questions already. I do have a few comments I'd like to make, though. I think it's important to kind of think back with the history of this issue and how it has come to light or been brought to light. And I use those words kind of quite indecisively because clearly previous to us raising this as an issue, this is not something that there was public awareness that was taking place, that the council is selling off empty council homes at auction. And for me, that's a real concern because there's a significant amount of public interest in the housing crisis, particularly in Portsmouth. Quite often people will know people personally who've been made homeless. who are sofa surfing, who are struggling in private rented housing when their wages aren't enough to pay the rent. So there's really strong and kind of passionate interests in how the social housing stock is being managed. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were quite surprised when it came to light that actually homes were being sold off at auction. But not only that this wasn't being reported in public. It came to light because people noticed on the auction pages there were houses which were listed as being sold by Portsmouth City Council. So they brought it to our attention, and we've done a fair bit of digging to try and shine a light and kind of raise awareness of what's being done by the council with its social housing stock. And I think, putting aside for a moment the rights or wrongs of the selling off of these houses, I do think it's important that people are aware of what is going on and how the properties are being managed, and the fact that there are houses that are being sold off at auction when we've got people homeless and stuck in hostels and temporary accommodation and private rented housing, which they can't afford. So the Labour group, kind of being led by myself on this particular issue, I think fulfilled the role of an opposition group, which is to identify these issues and scrutinise what the administration is doing to try and raise public awareness and engagement in those issues. I do think that there is a continuing issue that needs to be addressed with regards to the reporting of disposals or properties being sold at auction. I think there's such a strong public interest in this issue, and it's such an important issue and it makes a massive difference to people's lives, that there really needs to be an increased awareness and an increased kind of, I guess, transparency by the administration on which houses are being sold off and for what reasons. I think the grounds of commercial confidentiality, I do not accept that at all. I'm not convinced by that case that actually it would be potentially illegal for the council to report the individual properties that it's selling off, particularly at a time when people can just go onto the auction site and look and see which properties are being sold by the council. It does seem rather strange then that people can find that out via their own research, but somehow the administration is not able to publicly say what is going on. I find that strange, and I'm definitely not convinced that is the case. So going forward, we continue to have concerns about this policy of selling off empty council houses. We're not sure that on balance it is the correct one. And I think if we were the people making the decisions, different decisions were being made. Actually, we would bring these properties back into use and ensure that they're rented to people from the waiting list.
Sorry about that, Cal. I was just writing down some notes. But no, I'm grateful for you to that. Cal didn't ask a series of questions, but I don't know if there are any particular points that Cal raised that officers felt able to clarify on. I know that the Councillor Peter Harris, Councillor Corkery and I are going to have a discussion with Wayne around housing finance and around how things work, which is being penciled in for after this meeting. We couldn't do it before this meeting occurred. And I think there are many and varied things around housing finance, at which some of those things will be done. I, of course, don't know what went on between Cal and officers, and it's not my job to ask, and nor should I. But I don't know if officers had any particular responses to any of the factual points that Cal raised as opposed to the political ones. If not, that's fine.
I think the only thank you, Councillor Sanders. The only point I would wish to make is the report does set in context the disposal of council homes. I wouldn't wish it to be thought that we're actively selling empty council homes. This is, well, the case study talks to 8 properties that were sold recently at auction of 10 of 14,900 properties. We are actively trying to hold on to council homes. There's no policy to sell just at the point they come empty, but I appreciate the point being made nonetheless.
Okay, thank you for that, James. My own comments. I think it's quite interesting, and I understand, and Cal and I basically do not agree about this, and I understand that, and that's just a point of difference. But I find it interesting that Cal has focused on the disposal of 8 properties in his comments. The idea that we are buying 100 new council homes a year, that this year, despite the virus, we will be buying 190 new council homes a year this year, despite the virus, was not mentioned by Cal. Now, I assume it's because he agrees. That's fine. But I think that puts into context everything, frankly. The situation is vastly different to what it was a few years ago, whereby selling off 8 councils would be an incredible deal. It would mean a huge reduction in the council stock. That is now not the case. And in fact, indeed, the money sold from these 8 homes will provide, as I'm being told, between 10 and 12 new homes. So we're actually, as a result of this process, going to wind up with more council homes to house our homeless and house people on the waiting list than we had at the start. And that's before we get into the extra 190 that are being put forward this year, the £100 million investment over the next 5 years in order to buy new council homes, because I totally agree with Cal. Our waiting list is too long. There are too many homeless people. You can try and build your way out of a crisis, and I know Labour colleagues have been very clear that building the way out is essential, but building takes time, and and people don't have time. And that's why it's important to make sure we have as many council homes as we can. We said when Liberal Democrats came into administration, we wanted to buy homes for our homeless. We put in money to set that aside. All councillors supported that. That was great. But what is now clear, particularly with the ending of the borrowing cap, is that we have a real chance to cut the waiting lists that whose people from people about which we all get complaints, and to actually start to house our homeless, as well as the excellent work that's been done with rough sleepers. So I think the context is radically different. And in terms of the disposals, if you've got a home that has building defects or can't be put up or can't be brought up to the standards that exist, that are desirable for people living in social housing, you don't put council tenants in homes that are substandard. You've then got to look and see whether you can bring it back into use, which has been looked at, whether it can be given to someone else, which has been looked at, and only then, as the last resort, do you dispose of it. And even then, you put the money forwards to buy new council housing. So in this case, we've sold 8 properties and we're going to get 10 to 12 as a result. I think that's a good deal, personally. The Labour group seems to disagree. I respect that disagreement, but it is a point of disagreement. I think there are issues going forwards in terms of how we can actually try and see if we can make notes of this. My preference will be to go through the Governance and Audit Committee because that's where these sorts of things go to, and I'm happy to include that as part of their deliberations as well, because that's what they're supposed to do. I think, though, Cal's only talked about being open and transparent around the disposals, whereas I think if we're going to be as open as transparent as possible, we have to be open and transparent about the acquisitions as well, because they both fall within the same delegations. And that is something I will raise with the city solicitor over the next few days, because we're guided by him on what we can and cannot publicise. But I think it's absolutely crucial that that this paper is here so we have the principles. I would say this, that as a result of the work that's been done by Councillor Pater Harris and Councillor Corkery, who've both raised these issues with me, we now find that this council spending 100 million quid on buying new council homes. And it's going to be buying 100 every year for the next 5 years, and nearly 200 even during a pandemic. And I think that shows a significant commitment to council housing and will do a huge amount to improve the lives of people on our waiting list. So, Anna, have you got, aside from my gentle comments, have you got the 2 points which I raised, which is firstly to explore whether disposals and acquisitions can be put through the Governance and Audit Committee?
Yes, so you'd like it to go formally to them?
I would like a discussion to be opened up, because what I don't want is to be told by the city solicitor you can't do it. But I think we definitely need a discussion to be opened up. And then I made another point. which was around, I think, talking through again about how this can be made, how other ways in which it can be made more open.
Yeah, you're going to be discuss it with the city solicitor.
Yes.
How it be more
Yes,
transparent.
because I'm operating on the advice of the city solicitor, Cal, and I've essentially, this report is a compromise between him and me. I want as much out in the open as possible, and he's saying it's all down to individual delegations and stuff. But I think we can take this forward. But I'm delighted that we're buying as many council homes as we can, because as Cal says, we need to cut the waiting list, and we need to deal with people who are homeless. So on that, I think that I will note that report with those 2 points, which again will be put in the minutes. Anna?
Yes, they will. Yes.
Excellent. And on that basis, I don't think we had anything else, Anna, did we?
There's no other items.
Right, lovely. So on that basis, I formally close the meeting at 16 minutes past 5. I look forward to seeing Cal tomorrow at the full council meeting. I look forward to seeing other colleagues as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience, and have a peaceful evening. And I assume we can now turn off the live stream.
It'll take a couple of minutes. I just need to let Peter know that one.
Okay, so if everybody could just stay on for a couple of minutes before the live stream goes off, that would be superb.
Yeah, they're just about to finish.
Lovely.
When, if you can close it now, please. Yeah.